Hello, everyone. My name is Marcio Katz. I'm Get Global's international CEO, and this is our Get Privacy podcast. I'm so happy today to have Aaron Weller here with us. How are you today, Aaron?
I'm doing very well, thanks.
Okay, that's very good. And the reason why we are gonna speak with Aaron today, it's because we've done a couple of episodes before about different other data privacy topics. But this one, when we decided to talk about why dealing with data privacy goes way beyond just legal advice, his name just popped up for the reasons you guys are gonna understand. So, Aaron, I would appreciate if you just could talk a bit about yourself and how you got involved with data privacy.
Sure. So I came into privacy through information security. I worked in security since the late 90s, and then around about 2007, I kind of gradually transitioned into privacy. So I've worked with a number of different companies since then. I've been a consultant, and my current role is at HP, where I'm leading a new global privacy engineering center of excellence. So getting to create that function and really to work on the cutting edge of what we can do with privacy enhancing technology.
Very good. So that means that, as far as I understood, you are not a lawyer. You don't have a legal background. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah, I've had a lot of lawyers work for me over the years, but I'm not a lawyer myself.
Okay, perfect. And I'm just trying to bring some attention to this fact because I feel that, especially here in the US, data privacy is becoming more and more a legal matter, and I do understand why that happened. But we want to talk about how data privacy can be a matter that should be addressed a little bit more uh, with different skills than just legal advice,
Mhm.
right? I think that everything starts with a legal advice because we're talking about a regulation, right? But how do you see the lawyer's role when it comes to dealing with data privacy in an enterprise like HP, for example?
Yeah, I would agree with you that I think that the lawyer's role is critically important, right? There are some matters of interpretation of sometimes pretty vague privacy laws and regulations that require kind of that legal, the ability to give a legal opinion that I don't have as a non-lawyer. But I think even beyond that, as the privacy profession has matured, we've really reached a situation where there are so many different things to have an effective privacy program that lawyers aren't necessarily the ones that are best equipped to be doing a lot of the day-to-day operational work, or increasingly in kind of where my role comes in, more of that engineering privacy into products and systems. So I think what we're seeing now, particularly in larger organizations, is almost an ecosystem of privacy professionals, some of whom are lawyers, some of whom are more operationally focused, some of whom are more on the engineering side of things. And we work together not just with people who are largely focused on privacy, but I work with people in the marketing function, enterprise architects, the cybersecurity team. There's a broad group of stakeholders because, as you and I have discussed before, privacy touches pretty much every part of the organization. So it's important that we both understand who is using personal information and that we're able to all work together to help to manage and protect it appropriately.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, we do agree on that matter. It starts with the the legal interpretation of the rules, and most of the times they are extremely vague. And we definitely need the legal team with us. But as you said, there are so many other things that need to be carried out in a daily routine
Mhm.
and for most of the time it doesn't seem to be or it wouldn't be the lawyer or the general counsel role to deal with that kind of things. One of them, for example, is data protection, which is more into cybersecurity. But it's part of data privacy, right? The other part is management. You gotta measure a couple of KPIs to see if your data privacy program is okay,
Yeah.
or things that you should change. And as you said, in some other situations, you gotta understand most of the situations. You gotta understand the product. You gotta understand the business itself. So if you are a data privacy professional and you work for a database kind of business, you definitely need to understand the business itself. So it seems that in your case, in your current role, you got to understand the product. So this engineering aspect of dealing with data privacy, how both things connect: data privacy in understanding the product, or in HP, the devices, the printers, the personal computers, and so on.
Yeah, so that's been one of the things that coming into any new organization, it's really understanding what they do. And I think, as we've seen, many organizations now collect a lot more information than they used to in the past. That there's more feature-rich devices out there, right? They do more things, and we need more information for that. So definitely understanding the products, understanding the business, what products, how do they work, kind of what's the product roadmap look like. A lot of that's really important to be able to then think about not just how do we solve the problems today, but as we look at, as you said earlier, a lot of the laws and regulations are changing very fast. I don't want to build anything that's very over-engineered towards one particular requirement, particularly when you're looking at global organizations or even smaller organizations that have to comply with laws in different countries. It's important that when we're thinking about how do we build a privacy solution, even something that's pops up in a lot of different jurisdictions, like a subject access request, right? There's a lot of different legal nuances around that, but still the fundamental pieces of, how do I know that this is Aaron? Where can I go and find his information? How do I know it's this Aaron and not some other Aaron? How do I maintain the integrity of the systems if I delete some data? What data do I need to hold on to? Right, a lot of those questions become very operational, and they're not really about the interpretation of the law at that point. But we're very much based on that. We need that understanding, business requirements, and then into some of those technical requirements to go and, even if we're buying a system off of the shelf, we need to understand, how do we find the best system? How do we compare different systems? Do they meet all of our needs? Because we may have customers that need different languages. Maybe that's very important to us. But maybe for other organizations, it might not be. So I think that ability to really go from, what is sometimes a high level requirement in the law, give Aaron access to all of his data if he asks. There's a lot of steps between that and actually producing a report, some of which may be handled with outside vendors or software. But a lot of it's going to be understanding, as you said, kind of the individual product systems. What data do each of these devices collect? Where does it get stored? Where should we be getting it from? Right, we don't want to go back and ask for information directly off of a device if we've got the information in a way we can produce it faster from another database or something like that. So I think that's where, for me, it's one of the more interesting pieces of what I do, is really understanding kind of being at that cutting edge of some of these the ways that we're using information, and being able to manage that information in a way that not only is compliant, but also is in line with what people expect as well, right? That's one of the things that's really important to me, is that fundamentally privacy is about people, and it's about people's information, right? If we're looking at financial statements, still important information, but it may be nothing to do with people. But if we always think about, when we're looking at, are we doing the right thing? I think that's another piece that increasingly, kind of the ethical part of it as well. Like, just because we are legally allowed to do something, does it mean that we should? So that piece to me is really important as well when we're thinking about, and that's one of the things that I love when we get a few different people together from different parts of the organization, having these discussions. What can we do? What should we do? What's the way that we can build this so that in the future, we don't need to go and change everything when one of the laws changes? Those are very interesting challenges.
Yeah, definitely. And it's very interesting because for big organizations like HP and many others, Data privacy is a matter or an issue that needs to be addressed in different ways. What I mean by that is that there is the organization, the company itself, and there are the products, which are different things. For example, in Brazil, Get Global International used to be LG Electronics DPO, Data Protection Officer.
Okay.
So we did pretty much the same thing. We needed to take care of the organization. So all the requirements that would come from a data subject, human resource, processing personal information, marketing, using a lot of personal information, a large scale of data. That's one side of the data privacy area. The other one, all the products needed to be reset in some features just because of the Brazilian data privacy regulation, right? So, and when it's a global company and a multinational company, that challenge is even bigger because you got to do that in different markets. For example, one of our clients here in the US, Navis, it's a Californian company, and they have two softwares. Those softwares, they help ports to manage the cargo and the people inside those ports. And they sell to Europe and Brazil and California. That means that they need to change the software front end and back end in order to comply with 3 different data privacy regulations. And that's a big challenge. It's not easy for the data privacy professional to address those matters. And I think that the first challenge is to convince your peers, your colleagues, that data privacy is important. Because if the company is not aware of how important data privacy has become to this kind of business, this is part of our job to make sure that they do understand the challenge, do understand how important that is, and understand that we should make part of the whole process, the whole operation. So I would like to I would appreciate if you could share your thoughts on that matter, because I do know that probably HP data privacy is something that is already part of the whole process. We are talking about a huge company, but how do you see some other organizations? How would you address that kind of thing?
Yeah, I think if I think about it at a high level, it's really not everybody is a privacy professional, right? We say, and you say the same in information security, right? Security is everyone's job or part of everyone's job, and it's part of privacy is part of everyone's job that works with personal information. But you can't expect, and you're going to not have a good time if you expect everybody to be thinking about privacy all the time, right? That's just, they have so many other things to think about as well. So I would agree with you that I think when we're looking at how do we get an organization to do the right thing, a lot of it is around education, but it's also around making it easy, right? I don't want to go into a team and say, this is GDPR and this is what Article 5 says, and this is kind of all of the, here's the differences between GDPR and LGPD. And there's a lot of information there that people can do privacy well without having to know all of the why. They need to know the how. And I think that's a lot of what my team works on, is really how do we translate that information into something that somebody can take up and say, okay, I understand how to maybe get to 80% of the right answer. And if I need more help, I know where to go and ask the questions. But they're not just trying to make things up because, I know I should do this, but I don't really know how to do that at all. So one of the things I try and think about is, how do we make this very easy for people to understand? Like I was saying earlier, privacy is people. If we always think about this data set, not as ones and zeros, but as people, that gives you kind of the right mindset. One of the other things that I talk to people about is, if you think of privacy as the user experience for personal information, all the way through from the privacy notice, before we've even collected the information, all of those different touch points, You may have something on your phone that says we're using location information now, right? Reminds you. You may have a preference center. You can go and see, what emails did I want? Which ones do I not want? If you think of all of those pieces as part of an experience that the user has, part of that relationship that they have with you as a company, and of course, those relationships will vary quite a bit depending on, whether you're a social media company or a hardware company, software company, or a bank, or your doctor, right? Those relationships still exist, but they may have different pieces to it. So I think when we're looking at this complexity of global laws, I go back and I say, well, how's my relationship with someone in Brazil? Is that fundamentally different from somebody in Europe, fundamentally different from the US? And if we're doing the right things, if we have the right principles in place, and HP, like a lot of large organizations, has some privacy principles, which are included in our privacy notice. Those are the things that kind of help us make sure that everything we're doing, we want to be transparent. Like, what information do we collect? How do we use it? We'll tell you what we have if you ask for it, right? A lot of those things, even when we get laws that have a lot of little nuances to them, if we're doing the right thing kind of in the broad brushstrokes, it makes it easier for us to then comply with whatever that next little piece is.
Great insight. Yeah. And how do you deal with the engineers? Because that's a little bit different, I guess. Talking to someone who works for the HR department or marketing, finance, they are more used to some procedures, right? But engineers, most of the time they know how to do the things.
Mm-hmm.
So actually they control the whole process. They tell the organization how things should be done and not the opposite. And when it comes to privacy, it's the opposite. The company got to tell them what they should be aware of, or at least take care of. How do you deal with that kind of professional?
I think I try and meet the engineers where they are. So if they're using Jira, I try and work with them in Jira. I think I've been impressed by, not just at HP, but at other companies I've worked with, engineers by and large want to do the right thing. They just may not know what it is, or they may have some guidance that they say, a lawyer wrote this and I don't understand what it means. And if I want to get an answer, I've got to wait 2 weeks for somebody to get back to me. Right. So I see my job as really being enabling them, being their advocate, and helping them to get the answers they need quickly and in a way that they can use. Right. I don't want to say something like, well, you should minimize the data you collect in this application. They say, well, what does that even mean? Like, I need all of this information, right? How do I give them some tooling? How do I give them some guidance that's actually going to help them find the answer themselves? Maybe with a little bit of guidance from someone on my team, but I think a lot of it is just giving them the tools. Like, we've had tools in the security world for years that will look at your code and say, oh, there's a security vulnerability in this bit of code. You should rewrite it like this. Right? We're getting there in the privacy sense as well. But even without being able to have those fully automated tools, I think we can really help engineers by speaking their language, by communicating things in a way that's intended for them to understand. Right? Should they have to think between, do I need to apply differential privacy to this data set? They're just not going to think like that. Right? But if we say, well, what are the things we can actually, if we want to do this type of analysis, how do we do it in a privacy protecting way? Can we reduce the granularity of the data set? Can we reduce the richness of the data set? Are there any things we can do that will still get you to that outcome, but we can do it with less privacy risk? And I think having that kind of discussion, and maybe that's more with data scientists than engineers, it's meeting them where they're already thinking about those kinds of things in those ways. And I'm not trying to say, well, I'm going to go back and cite this law, which good lawyers don't do anyway, but it's really that interpretation of, how do we get all the way from this is why we need to be doing these things down to how can you help me do the right thing today?
And in a daily routine, from your point of view, what would be the best way to do that? Would the data privacy area be part of the project itself? What I mean is understand what we are, building, from the technical aspect of it, and then give advice on how things should be done, or it's more just give them what the regulation is, and what kind of things we should achieve, and I mean the technical area, they should decide what would be the best path or the best way to achieve those goals. So how do you see that? Should the data privacy be part of the whole construction and development, or maybe data privacy doesn't have that kind of skill, and we should just give them the guidelines, the things that they should achieve, but they will find a way to achieve those goals?
Even if you have the right skills on the team, you're not going to have enough time to cover every single project at that level of detail. So I think similar to if you were doing a privacy impact assessment process, you've got to have some kind of, how risky is this project? How much do we need to get involved? The way that I look at it is that there's two places that we can really help. One is building the right thing. So helping with requirements, making sure you're not doing anything that fundamentally is not going to comply with privacy requirements or meet our privacy principles. So building the right thing, but then building the thing right. So kind of the other side
Mm.
would be, did we actually do the things we said we were going to do? Did we collect extra information that we didn't include in the specifications we gave you earlier? So it's really trying to pick where can we be most effective with the people we have available, the resources we have available. I would agree with you that I think guidelines, self-help, giving people some of those tools to, as I said, get most of the way there. I just wrote some guidance around log files, for example, where, how do we very, very clearly, these are all the things you should think about before capturing personal information in a log file. And if you do, here's the encryption standards, here's all the other things you need to do. But I can put it all in one place rather than having to go and search for 4 or 5 different pieces of guidance. And I can say, start here. And if you, I can come and check that later on, or one of my team can go and do that. Or we can say, is there anything else? Did we miss anything? Let's go and improve that guidance. But I'd like to get to the point where, with a lot of those kinds of things, people can find, they can easily find it. So they can go through, they don't have to write to somebody and say, I'm writing a new log file, what should I do? They can find that easily. They know kind of what to do if they still need additional guidance. But it's increasing what my team can get done without increasing the headcount. Because I think in any organization, no matter how large, right, we need to be as efficient as we can be, as well as being effective. So I don't think it's any one of those things. I think it's really a combination of a little bit of all of them.
Okay. And do you guys get more involved with the front end and the functionalities, or sometimes you get involved also with the back end? I mean, where the data is storage, who do we share the data with, or it's more about the consumer or the way the consumer sees data privacy?
It's really all of it. It's a bit of the front end, a bit of the back end, a bit of the APIs and things that stitch everything together. Looking at who do we share the information with. I think it's really all the way through the data lifecycle, and that's why it's important that you have, as you were saying earlier, kind of a good understanding of the products. Like, what does a printer actually do? What does a laptop do? What does a webcam do? What data is produced? How much of it stays on the device? Right? If you understand kind of at least at a high level all of those things, when you go into some of those discussions, we've got a new webcam we're going to release. Okay, what does it do differently? Does it collect more data? Does it do things differently with that data? It helps you kind of have that discussion. And then we can say, well, maybe we have some guidance that's specifically for a new webcam, because these are the things that we know that it could collect. These are the things we know it's going to do with that data. But that's kind of the evolution, I think, the maturity. As you go through and you say, well, printers can do some very different things, right? That the printers we have 15 years ago are very different from the capabilities today. So can we write some guidance now and then update that on a regular basis? And if there's something that falls outside of that guidance, go and do some special, consultation with the specific team. So I think that's a lot of the as with any kind of compliance type role, a lot of it is really this resource. How do you spread your resources to have the maximum effect with the resources you have available?
Yeah, and talking about the resources you have, do, do you usually engage and hire third parts like a consultancy to work on some specific projects? How do you deal with that, or is just in-house?
It's a bit of both, depending on kind of what the skill set is. So, because I think generally organizations, if you are in house, you get to really understand the business, you understand a lot of those nuances. But then when I was a consultant, I had clients I worked with for several years where I really did understand their business pretty well as well. So, I think it really depends on what this specific problem is. And that's where as well, I'm looking at how do we engage with research institutions? How do we engage with people who are thinking about some of the cutting edge kind of solutions to these problems? Maybe it's a solution that we don't even have an identified need for yet, but oh, that could be something. Oh, we could use that on this product that we're about to release. So it's really, I think, looking at the way that I've talked to people about it is I want to be able to answer the questions we have today, but I also want my team to be thinking about the questions that the teams will be asking next year, right? How do we get ahead of some of those questions as well? How do we understand the best that there is, right? As a center of excellence, we should be understanding the best there is of not just what we can do today, but what we might be able to do tomorrow, and thinking about that as we're looking at new product releases too. So that's one of the more
Hmm.
exciting pieces of the role is kind of not just working with the toolkit that I have today, but saying, okay, can we look at where we're going to be in a year or 2 years? We've seen even in the last few months, we're recording this in March 2023, the rise of AI and ChatGPT and DALI and some of the other. We were not, well, I don't know that anyone was having these conversations in the same way even 6 months ago, right? We've seen a lot of development in a very short time frame, and I think as privacy professionals, that should be exciting, right? There's a lot of work to do. There's a lot of standardization. There's a lot of finding the right balance between the benefits of some of these tools and the potential privacy
Hmm.
concern. But it's something that is a new frontier to work on. That's from different from maybe what we were doing even a couple of years ago.
Mhm. Yeah, and sometimes the consultancies they are able to get the kind of solution that sometimes you don't have just because they've experienced different situations in
Yep.
some other companies, for example. So I think it should be a mix of things. Of course, the CPO, the chief privacy officer, or the head of the area is the one who's going to decide what would be the best resource for the specific issue that needs to be addressed. But I do think that some consultancies they are specialized in some data privacy issues that might bring to the table some extra solutions that might be necessary to address the topic. Um, could
Yeah.
you share with us? And I'm not talking about HP here, okay? So you don't need to let us know anything specific about the company. But in your experience, in your career, do you remember any project that was not released because of a data privacy issue? I mean, the whole project was just moving on, and at certain point, oh, okay, let's talk with these guys, these privacy guys, and when you faced the project, you said, "Yeah, this is a no go."
Yeah, this is, I mean, as you said, I've worked with a number of companies over my career, and I've definitely seen this
Mhm.
over the years. I think there's a lot of times where privacy is involved too late in the process. And that's been any time that something, I really don't want to be in a position ever again where I'm like, we've got to delay something because of a privacy issue, because that means that something's failed earlier in the process where we
Earlier.
should have been brought in
Mhm.
earlier. And I think that's one of the things that people don't necessarily understand between some of the privacy concerns and security ones. If it turns out that we can't collect some data, that could mean a complete reworking of an entire product. Whereas a lot of security concerns would be, well, okay, if we collect it, maybe we need to encrypt it, maybe we need to have extra access control. But some of the privacy concerns, where I've seen the real problems, are where it does something that the proposed solution does something just so fundamentally problematic that it's a real challenge to get it back on track without completely reimagining what that solution would be. Thankfully, I've not seen that happen very often, but I have seen that where privacy doesn't get involved until somebody says, "Well, look, we've got this great idea. We're going to do this." And there have been a couple where I've sat in the meeting and said, there's a whole lot of reasons why that's not a good idea. Although I could see, I can see what you're thinking of as the benefit, but there's a lot of potential drawbacks as well. But
Yeah.
if you've got a mature program where privacy is getting involved at the right time in the process, you should never be in that situation where you're stopping something from going out the door, because that's not really good for anyone.
Yeah, yeah. I remember one of the projects that we didn't work on because we just said it's from scratch. It's a no-go. This company, they came with they said, excellent solution to manage all personal information. We are going to use blockchain to control everything, and we are going to know what kind of data we are collecting, where the data is, because with blockchain we can do that.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing is that blockchain, you cannot delete anything, so that's a big data privacy issue. So definitely those guys didn't know anything about data privacy.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why we need to work together from scratch, because those guys, they spent a lot of money and time, and it was a startup, but there was a big investment fund behind them, a German fund, and for that reason, the whole project needed to be forgot, because
Mm-hmm.
it didn't work at all. I mean, it wouldn't work, but at least they had they asked us, or they looked for some technical advice. Otherwise, they would launch the product and see what would happen. So this is just one example, because I'm pretty much sure that many others, you have faced it during your whole career, for sure. And
Yeah.
how do you see the U.S. data privacy market from now on? Because I'm going to give my opinion right away.
Mm-hmm.
I feel that definitely big companies here in the U.S. are starting to implement their data privacy programs. But when it comes to some specific industry besides health, finance, those industries that for a while already has a data privacy regulation,
Mm-hmm.
only software and hardware companies are really investing money in data privacy because of their product. Because if I'm going to sell my product, to Europe and some other parts of the world where data privacy is already more regulated, more, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, the government and the data privacy culture itself, it's part of the society, and you are going to be asked things from the government, from
Mm-hmm.
the data subject, and so on. If you don't make sure that your product and the software or the hardware is not compliant with the legal requirement, you may not even sell to those markets. But I want to hear from you, because I have this feeling, I'm not always sure, because most of our clients here in the US, and you do know we are a European data privacy consultancy coming to the US. Now our headquarters is here in the US, but our biggest market is still Europe. So US is something that we are learning a little bit more every single day. So sometimes I have an opinion, but I'm not sure. So I would better ask the market, and of course you are part of the market. How do you see, at this point, the U.S. data privacy market?
Yeah, I think from as you mentioned, there have been certain sectors in the US, and I think fundamentally, so maybe starting off, fundamentally, the US is still sectorially regulated. So we have different regulators, different privacy laws for different industry sectors, which is very different from, the G in GDPR stands for general, and it's because it's generally applicable to a whole lot of different kinds of data. And I think that's been one of the
Same
things.
thing with the Brazilian
Same thing with
LGPD.
LGPD. Yep. And same thing with a lot of other laws is that they have a broad
Okay.
definition of personal information, and it applies across all industry sectors. And I think that's been one of the things that the US, as you said, really the FTC under their Section 5 powers has been the regulator of default for everybody that's not regulated by another regulator in the US. But that's starting to change with now California has its own privacy regulator because traditionally at the state level, a lot of that work has been done by the state attorney general under their kind of unfair and deceptive trade practices provisions or authority. But as you know, the attorney general, just like a general counsel, it's a general role. They have a lot of different things to do. So now that California will actually have a dedicated privacy office, I don't know that I would say it's similar to the Data Protection Authority in Europe yet, but it's kind of heading in that direction where you'll have one authority that really is focused on privacy matters. So that's going to be interesting because it really then applies some of these things with a broad brush. But one of the concerns that I still have, even if you look at the proposed legislation that was at the federal level proposed last year, the AEDDPA, I think it was, they still have a lot of carve outs for existing federal laws. So you're still, even if you have a federal law that passes, even if it preempts state laws, you're still going to have, well, some companies have to comply with this law for this data. We have to comply with HIPAA for this data, GLBA, CAN-SPAM, all of the others. So I worry that without, and I don't know that this would ever happen in practice, but I worry that without actually taking out a lot of these carve outs, it's going to be hard for organizations to have the same clarity that they do in countries where they say, yeah, we have GDPR plus e-privacy plus the Data Act plus, but all of these things, they have their own kind of niches and they all work together rather than saying that, well, this is going to work on one type of data, but if you have another type of data, it's going to work differently because you end up in some situations like if I have a medical device that's approved by the FDA that's a wearable, that's regulated under HIPAA. If I have a watch that's kind of like just a watch that takes my heartbeat, not regulated the same way. It's the same data, right? So you end up in some of these strange scenarios that don't happen in other countries in the same way, just because of this fragmentation of the way that the US does things.
Yeah, definitely. Do you believe but for a global company, that there should be a global data privacy program with some specific things for specific sectors in some specific countries, or each country should have its own data privacy program? How would you manage such thing?
There's definitely trade-offs between those options, and I think while people say people who don't do this may say, well, isn't it easier just to have you find the law that's the strictest and just do that wherever it is stricter? That can cause restrictions on the business that are unnecessary, right? They're not legally required. They may not even be expected by people in that jurisdiction. Right, people in the US expect to receive mail and then opt out, email and opt out, rather than having to sign up for it in the first place. So that there are some things where if you do apply one standard globally, you're probably going to find that you're too restrictive in some cases, and it's going to be very hard. You're going to have to do a lot of work to find the most restrictive requirement in a way that you can meaningfully map those things together. But I think the other end of the spectrum, where you say every single country goes and does its own thing and complies to its own local law, I don't want to build a product that I have to have 50 different variations of because we sell it in 50 different countries. So I think the
Mhm.
right answer is somewhere in the middle, where particularly with things like privacy principles, we try and have one set of global principles. There may be some local nuances, but largely we're going to try and be close to a good standard globally. With there, when we need to go above that, there will be additional restrictions or controls in certain jurisdictions. I know that you may be listening to this and saying, well, doesn't that mean that you're doing the minimum necessary? And I don't really mean that. I think it's finding that right balance where, and this comes back to my earlier comment about, or the earlier question around privacy is more than just legal, right? It's about ethics. It's about doing the right thing. It's also about building things in a way that's efficient, that we can provide them to you, the consumer, at a lower price, because we don't have to create a very specific widget for Brazil because we have to build it very differently from every other country, right? That would mean that and having lived in Australia previously, the cars drive on the other side of the road from a lot of the major markets. So they tend to be more expensive for that and other reasons, because you've got a limited market that has a very specific requirement. So I think
Yeah.
when you're looking at this, privacy is one of many important factors. And I think it's important to realize that, or to think through, we need to be balancing a lot of these different things. We can't always say privacy is number one at the expense of everything else. But on the other side, we can't say, well, privacy doesn't matter because we have to ship something. So I think finding that balance and using things like the risk-based approach that's included in GDPR, and some of the other state laws in the US as well, there is an ability to make a judgment call within a certain window, right? If things aren't too risky, if we're not using sensitive data, using it in certain ways, it does provide companies some latitude to find that middle ground. So I do think that if we look at everything being the same at a global level or everything being country specific, there's somewhere in the middle that I've seen most large organizations land. Although they may get there, a lot of companies did, starting with GDPR and then saying, okay, now what do we change from GDPR? Because it was a good standard that a lot of other laws since then have followed.
Yeah, but I feel that if you use the GDPR as your standard here in the US, you are going to leave a lot of business opportunity on the table. And I think the data privacy nowadays is global. That's Get Global's slogan, because it is. And I usually say that data privacy is tripolar. It's not bipolar. It's
Mhm.
because there are three different standards so far: the US standard, the European standard, and the Chinese standard.
Yep.
In India, might come with a fourth different standard to regulate data privacy. And when we need to manage a global organization, I think we should have the backbone, which
Mhm.
you call principles, and most of them don't come from legal. They are not legal principles. They are more ethics. Comes from ethic, being ethical. Like you gotta respect the personal information
Mhm.
and the data subject. That's a principle. I mean, it's not about the business. It's also about
Yeah.
the consumer. Or if we are going to process children's personal information, that's sensitive. It doesn't need to be written in the law,
Mhm.
but it's a common sense, right?
Yeah.
So I think we should have these backbone, but definitely each country has its own regulation, and running a business is a risk activity
Yeah.
everywhere.
Mhm. Yeah.
So you just need to identify those risks and try to mitigate those risks, right?
Yeah, and I think to your point as well, if you use GDPR as your global standard, you would not be compliant with US law, right? Do not sell, do not share, the categories of personal information that are required under CPRA. There's a lot of nuances in the new US state laws that go
The
above and
business
beyond GDPR.
purpose under the
Yep,
CCPR is not exactly the same thing
as a legal basis.
as the minimization,
Yep,
right?
yep.
Because one is the minimization and the other one is, what's my purpose? What kind of business am I running? Would that be necessary? So it's slightly different.
Yeah.
So definitely being compliant with the GDPR doesn't mean that you are compliant with the US regulation. And if you are just compliant with the GDPR, probably you are leaving a lot of opportunities on the table.
Yeah, yeah. I did talk to a German company last year where they said, "Well, we're already GDPR compliant. Do we need to do anything else for the US?" And I'm like, "Well, I'm not a lawyer, so I can't give you legal advice. But there's a lot of you should go and read these things because there's a lot of other requirements in there that you may want to think about too."
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, we've been dealing with some European companies doing business in the US, and they have never had to 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 care about data privacy in the US. But now that has already changed because the biggest, economically wise, the biggest US state, California,
Mhm.
with the biggest economy, is regulated, and it's a different standard. It has a GDPR flavor,
Mhm.
but it's not the same thing at all.
Yep.
So now the Europeans need to get compliant with the US regulation. And so it's becoming more and more global data privacy
Yep.
when it comes in making sure that big organizations get compliant with the different regulations. So it's very interesting, to talk with you, Aaron. We've been doing things together, and when I learned that you had this new position, I got so excited because I'm HP consumer, and it's always great to know who is behind the scene, right?
Mhm.
So once now I'm using any kind of device, I do know that you might have worked on that device, on that product. So thank you so much for being here with us and sharing your thoughts on privacy matters.
No problem. Always appreciate the invitation. Thanks very much.
Okay. Thank you so much, everyone. So in a couple of hours, this episode is going to be uploaded on Spotify. The next episode, we are going to talk about how software engineers, should deal with privacy by design. As most of you know, ISO has its own standard for privacy by design, and we are going to talk about this topic, which seems to be a very technical kind of thing to learn about. So thank you so much, everyone, and Aaron, once again, thank you so much for being with us.
Anytime. Thank you.
Okay, bye bye, guys.
Bye.